Well, then, let's dive into it. So today's lecture, I want to focus on taking past two things we focused on, which was just the stickman itself, and then how to use the stickman with a basic pose. And today, take those two things and apply them to more complex poses or things that would be in weird perspective or dynamics, or I guess just weird angles, right? Because that's the part where most people get tripped up. So, um, grab a skeleton here. Start with actually here. Photoshop inviting me already. That was quick. So the first thing to keep in mind is the basis of all perspective and dynamics is you need to understand how forms rotate in 3D space. And when I say forms, I mean like cylinder, right? A sphere, and maybe like a rectangle. There's not really many cubes on the human body. So these are the main things you kind of think of when you think of the body. You're going to be hard pressed to like find a cone, maybe like a nose or something, but these are the main shapes we can think of when you think of a human body. Like most of your limbs are going to be cylinders. Part of your head is like a sphere. You can think of like your rib cage and hips as rectangles. And so if we take that first skeleton, and I know I kind of suggested to not get too hung up on forms because it kind of holds you back a little bit. There's nothing wrong with it. It's actually a good learning tool. It's just really important you don't get hyper focused on that, because if you use forms as an intermediate learning tool and then hold on to them for dear life, they will hold you back eventually. So I just want to make sure that that's in your awareness as you try and progress, that forms are just like an intermediate step so you understand what's happening fundamentally and then let it go once you understand it and just let it fade into the right. So if I pull up our little skeleton fella, here we go. Drippy droppy. We're cutting them out. We don't need that. I said we don't need that. Right? So I'll just quickly point out some of the forms here. Like, for instance, I mentioned the circles tend to exist like here at the top of the head, like that's a circle. And so like if we have a skull, here I'll draw a couple circles, right? Okay, that's forward, that's side, and back. If this is forward, right, there's the bottom of the head. Form is here, right? And then if we turn it and this goes this way, suddenly he's facing this way, right? Maybe he goes this way. And you can see circles are pretty friendly for rotating in space, right? This line here, pretty easy to follow because circle's always kind of a circle no matter where you look at it. It's just keeping in mind where the focal point of the circle is as it rotates. If we are to do, say, a cylinder, which might exist, say, right here, right? Imagine the arm is. Oh, what do I use? I use a XP pen, like draw tablet. I don't remember what the actual term is. I used to use a Wacom for years, but then I was getting problems with my wrist from the angles, and so I just finally sucked it up, spent a few $100 on a good tablet, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made because my arms feel great. Um, anyway, thinking of a cylinder like this, if you imagine it like an arm sticking out, right? If his arm sticks out, it, right? This is bicep, here is arm, right? Then this color, our cylinder right here. And as a cylinder rotates in space, it gets shorter. So like if we imagine those joints we have here, right? That's these ones, those little doozies. Put a little line between them. As this arm moves towards us, as in like I'm taking it from the side and bringing it out to the front of me, this cylinder is going to get shorter. And so if I were to, I could even just copy this over and just squish it. You're going to see, oop, that is a wrong. Tapping around too fast. You're going to see the sides bulge out like this on this, become more visible, and then these balls stay at the ends, right? And again, once more, if it keeps rotating, you're going to eventually just do this, where there's actually a ball here and then a ball in behind it. Grab a red, and so like this is an arm pointing right at you. You'll do this like a cross section. The forearm's going to be still right in front of it, and the shoulder's right behind it, and that's a cylinder directly facing you. Over here, it turns as it goes to 3/4. That makes sense so far. Does everyone follow how these forms rotate in space? Is that starting to make sense? Okay, so let me do a quick little run through. Curious of what are the general shapes of the body. I'm gonna just super quick lay in what's where. So let's use, I'll grab another color here. I don't know. I like purple. Purple's a nice color. So let's use purple as, so I'm gonna use reds, cylinders, blues for circles, and purples for rectangles. Right? We'll go to our little buddy over here. This is a circle up here. Nice. That's good and clean. Okay, so this is a circle, right? And you have, and then, I mean, most of the body, most of it is cylinders. People are a lot of cylinders. Like this is a general cylinder, and this, the neck is a great place. I did mention this in the last lecture's Q&A. Question Ray asked, where it was about why can't you use cylinders as the main form defining feature? Because when you have weird joints like a neck, a cylinder actually misleads you to how things are actually shaped. If you want to know what I'm talking about, I'm not going to go on a big tangent here about it, but that's in the last video, the last Q&A. You can go check it. I think it's about halfway through, where I explain why you shouldn't get hung up on using 3D shapes to construct the human body. They're just to help you figure out how things move and rotate and how to kind of actuate. Anyways, moving on, there's a cylinder there. There is a cylinder in the midriff. It's more like an oval, like it's kind of like this in the midriff, right? You don't want to do like an actual, like a straight up cylinder, because that's not quite right. People are a little squishy. Of course, your arms are mostly cylinders. Cylinder, let's make this guy a little lighter so we can see. Cylinder, cylinder, leg, obviously, big cylinder, 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 right? Your major squares would be here, right? This is a dude's torso. You kind of have a shape sort of like this, right? That's kind of the general shape of a torso. I can do better. I can do better. Right? So if that like rotates in space, let's say it rotates this way and we want like he's looking at him from the side slightly up, you're going to get a shape kind of like this, right? And like you're going to have shoulder here and his arm comes down and there's his elbow and his right here, head, right? That tracking? Does that make sense so far? Yeah, I'm seeing. Yes, good. It's the same thing for the hips. The hips also have a rectangular kind of shape. There, like I said, remember that bucket I was talking about? So it's really similar to the torso, a little smaller. Again, it kind of varies. Like, for instance, a male hip, you can do that kind of shape like this, but a female, I can do that. Such a mess. Like a male hip, you might want to do this. There's a female hip, you might want to go square or invert the trapezoid, right? Or joints out here, etc., etc. Man would be more in. And then, of course, you can think of circles for all of the joints. I am not going to touch hands and feet because they're their own little worlds. If you want to simplify things, I would just think of a hand as a rectangle, right? Where you can think of hands just kind of like blocks like this, right? That's a good simple shape for a hand. There's a thumb here, right? There's the thumb, fingy, right? That's kind of a general hand shape. But you can get away with just using a rectangle for your hands. This is just for when you think about things in 3D space, because remember, all of this is about how to understand what a body is doing in 3D space. Same thing with the feet. Feet you can kind of think of as like fat cubes, but they really do more like maybe this weird kind of shape, I guess you can think of, like a triangle, cube, or something. But don't get too hung up on that. Again, with the whole neck situation and the forms, this is just to kind of make sure you can think in 3D space. Because what you're trying to do here is you're trying to make essentially a 3D model of the human body in your head that you can pose with your imagination and then put that down onto paper in a 2D space. Orange, having some water. And then with that, hopefully we have a general idea of, oh, I didn't do the jaw. We don't have a general idea. I didn't do the jaw, so we have no idea. Jaw's a bit of a rectangle, right? The head is kind of like this. And then this kind of sits in a box, right? Not exact, approximate. You get the idea. Beating a dead horse. Blah, blah, blah. That, let's move on to an actual dude. Where my first one here, you can see this guy is really cool. He's got a little bone necklace and matrix glasses. Kind of looks like Cypher from the just a fun reference pose. I don't know why he's wearing a necklace. Doesn't matter. But I found this and decided it was a really good opportunity to show you how this stuff works. So here, opacity a bit. Let's. All right. Here. And wait, no, wait. This one was blue. This one was purple, right? Okay. So coming back to our dude here, what I want to highlight on this figure is his thigh. That's the part where it's like, this is a good opportunity to learn. Because you can see if you actually just draw around his thigh as a shape, it looks like a ball, right? Like if you just look at it for what it is, that's his thigh right there. But if I were to just decide after you told me, hey, can you draw a leg? I go, yep. There's your leg. It's done. That'll be $1,000, right? You're not going to see it as a leg because what's happening is you have a cylinder here. That is, his leg is like doing this, right? Bent under itself, and what's there, that's what's happening. But the thing is you're seeing it from here, right? This is where your eye is. Little anime shining there. Ooh. Get really invested in this. So the problem is you're seeing it in this direction. So you don't see all this information back here. You're just seeing the front of a circle right here. Right? And so this goes back to where I was talking about. You have to understand a 3D model of the human body. Because when you want to draw this thigh, like I want to do him in this like Spider-Man pose, you have to mentally take this thigh and rotate it. Where like we do a down, and we're going to put our cylinder, the joint and a joint, fat cylinder. Here we go. And you're going to rotate it in space. So you got to think of these balls rotating, right? Or like if it's a top-down view, this comes this way, and eventually you get this. But then side view, I don't make things too convoluted because this is a little strange if you're new to it. But you rotate it across itself until eventually you get kind of like the balls kind of here and here. So there's the general cylinder. So you get this kind of shape, right? And there's this actual thigh. Even though if we were to compare these, there's the length of the thigh from the side view. This looks ridiculous, right? Not the same. What's happened is because it exists in space, is this shorter, and so that's the actual quote-unquote length of the thigh. Even when I take this and compare it to the first one, you can see there's a drastic difference in size. And that is really the fundamental thing to get your head around when you draw things in perspective, is you kind of have to keep your landmarks while moving things in space. So what do I mean by landmarks? I mean, think of it this way. If this is his thigh, right? Right here is a big old meaty thigh. Let's use, first let's, color's consistent. Right, there's his thigh. Right, here's Buddy's thigh. Knee, right? Knee. What you can do, if you're having a hard time rotating things, is you leave marks, landmarks, on the forms as they rotate. So let's say in the middle of his thigh, we want to picture a line. Let's even go this many lines, right? As this rotates, here, what I want you to do, right here, you're going to take these 3 lines and put them here. So like about halfway, right? Here's this, about halfway is about there. So put a line, a contour line there, and then we can go kind of halfway between here and here, the line there, and the same thing here, there, and suddenly you have your general landmarks again. Even though this is way shorter than this, you kind of know where things should be, right? So for instance, like an important landmark, which doesn't really matter when you do these bent forms, is like middle of the thigh is where the hand should go, right? And so if for whatever reason you had like a hand nearby, if he was like bent with his arm, you would know it would kind of come to about there. You have your landmark. And then the other part that I want to cover here is his shin, which is underneath, because it's almost lost, right? Shin by itself, like it is just, it's like this little shape like this. His whole shin looks like this. Let's use color. I know I color coded these at the start, but you know what? We're going to have to abandon that because there's just too much going on. They're both cylinders, which means they should both be red, but if I do them both red, you can't tell them apart, and then everyone's going to just go with like, I don't know what's happening. So we're going to use purple, and no one's going to say anything. Okay, cool. So, right? Same thing. We're like, here it looks so tiny and stupid, but you have to kind of, it's like actually like this because it's like tucked under. So you have to imagine, remember we talking about draw through last week? You have to imagine that it's kind of tucked in behind. And same thing with making up some contours, right? But here you can't even see the contours. They're like all stacked. This, right? Because like, think of this as the cylinder here, right down the shin. And then you make like the contour lines. You just imagine them on the bottom of the shin. You won't see any of them here because the shin is below our view because we are seeing from, we have our eye here. We're seeing it from this angle. And so because of that, logically, you will not see these marks. You won't even see any of the contour lines because you're seeing it from this point, right? So you have to imagine it in your head. You have to imagine those contour lines as you put it under and just learn to rotate things in your head in 3D space. I know when you start, it's kind of weird and strange. That's what you're doing is you just orient the things and logic it out your educated guesses, and just sort of piece it all together. And that's the basis of using forms for the body. That's would apply to every other part of the arm. We're going to get into arms next, because arms are, they're probably what we need to focus on the most when it comes to perspective, because you want to have like people pointing at the camera, or we're going to look at thumbs up. But before I move on, there's the the basics of forms rotating in space. Makes sense so far. Things are clicking for people. Let me know if I went too fast on anything, if you want to clarify a little bit before I get into the next section. Is it like drawing in 3D? Yes, essentially. What you're doing is you're creating a 3D map in your head, like a laser scan of the human body, and then you are taking that and communicating it in a 2D form being on a screen. Yes, practice is inevitable. That's the other half of this, is once you have your fundamentals, that's only half of the battle. You have to go and just draw these things and get your head around the idea of these forms being lost in space. Okay, so generally we seem to have an idea of it. Oh, good. Moving on to the next piece. Just have all that. We'll close Cipher, move on to the believe this. Think about it really hard. And I have these two people here, both giving thumbs up, but you can see there's some big differences. Point out really, really soon. Yes, actually, Ignis, that's what I'm covering right now, is perspective and how things change sizes relative to the space they're in. And we can see that immediately. That's why I have these two things here. If I take this line person, we're going to put them by their heads, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Right? This guy's thumbs up is clearly bigger than his head. Earl's thumbs up is clearly perspective. Boom. Got it. Well, so yes, Ignis. So that's like the idea of, as far as holding a pencil up to get perspective relative, or holding a pencil up for relative sizes. A hand is generally, this is when it's flat, like a hand is generally about 2/3 of the face, right? That's the general length. And so if I take this and rotate it, you can see that's about the right size for her knuckles, right? Erase, right? See that? How the palm is about the right size. But if we go to our buddy over here, if we draw a little hand, about 2/3, right? We take that puppy, we put it next to his hand. Oh god, it all just fell apart. Oh no. Oh no, what are we gonna do? Because it's like 2 feet closer to us, because it's away from his face. And so what do you do in those situations? Well, you just draw the hand bigger. The bigger you draw the hand, the closer it's going to look. That one you'll just have to kind of play with, get the feel of it. Like if I were to take his hand, quick here, And let's say I made it even bigger. You can just make it bigger. It's like it's right in our face now, right? And so the bigger you make it, the closer it is. It's just really that simple. I don't think I can make it any more clear. But what I also wanted to point out on this guy's hand is how the limbs stack. So you can see how the thumb or the thumbs up is bigger, but I want you to look at the important part. You see how she just has these two cylinders right here that are nice, easy to work with size. Like if I take this cylinder right here, pull it out and away. Stick boy. Stick man. We talk about those landmarks, right? Where, like, from the belly button, right? The forearms about the belly button to about the groin, right? Oh, she doesn't have a groin. But we can take that and go, well, it's about a head, give or take, right? Pretty close to a head. In fact, if you hold your forearm up, it's holding up to my head right now. It's a little bit longer, right? You can always just use your own body for reference. We take this and compare it to her head. That's pretty darn close, isn't it? That's because this is nice and flat against her body. So there's no weird perspective going on. All of it's there, easy peasy, right? Those contours in. It's so straightforward that it's not even worth practicing. You know what I mean? Now, if we go to our friend over here, take a look at his, you'll see that it's doing this. It's in space, right? Right? Where if we take those contour lines, pretty, don't fight me, right? If we take these lines from over here, right about halfway, there's that, there's that, there's that. Even though the size of this cylinder objectively is much shorter than this, right? I take his cylinder and put it next to his head, it's shorter than his head, even though this one over here is about the size of her head. And let's do his other part of his arm, right? Come on, let's do it different. Yeah, let's do a different color. We'll do purple, or let's do blue, right? No, that blue is hard to see. Let's do the purple. That's better, right? So this here, again, in space, right? And there's the contours, middle, middle, middle. And that is how it stacks up. Where again, if we look over at our girl with the arms flat against it, like, hopefully you can see the difference, right? If you can't see the difference, you're probably gonna have a hard time with perspective and form. Not to be too blunt. Is that making sense so far? Right? We're understanding that shapes all squish and move as they stack and orient in space, and it's sinking into our brains. And we know that we can just use the modified contour lines to keep track of where things are in space. Good. Awesome. I love seeing people are getting it. So we have covered contour lines, thinking in 3D. Our thumbs up here. In fact, actually, I have an example here to just illustrate this to the absolute limit. As we have that, is this picture right here. Look how big her hands are compared to her head. This one is like, this is, I was digging through the royalty-free photos for references, so I can show you guys this stuff. Look at her. Look at it. Like twice the size of her head. But because it's so darn big, it feels like the thumbs are right in our face. Plus her head's like blurred out too. It's like her thumbs up are like an inch from our nose. And that's how you make things seem closer, is you just make them bigger. Later, I will get into using perspective with the pose at the same time. Get your head around that one, because that can get super crazy, but I want to introduce the idea. That's just, this one right here is just to show you a really extreme example of perspective. And you can also see, if I dive into it here, you can't even see her arm. Like, there's a little hint here. Even though her arms are clearly, I mean, you know, we all know she's a human being, so her arms are clearly doing this, where there's the bicep, and there's the forearm, and there's the hand, right? Doing the thumbs up. Right? We know it's doing that. But it's all stacked. So if, like, let's use different colors here. Illustrate this. Because we're here to illustrate, right? If that's like forearm, black for bicep. You can see the bicep kind of shows down here, right? Ever so slightly in this blur, you can see it. And then you can see a little bit of her forearm. And then the rest. All hands, boys. All hands. Oh, whoops. Right. And that's what's happening there. All just stacking, stacking, stacking. Turn her down. These are two cylinders that are facing us directly. Right? Like if we take this, put in these joints. Right? There's one here. That is the wristiform. Then there's one here connecting the bicep and the forearm. Use like a different, an extra color. We'll use some green. This one. And that's what's happening. Boom. They're green. I'm hoping this is all just starting to fire off. Here's another example I have to show some arms that are really foreshortened that I was hoping would really just drive the point home. Some ballerina, I assume. But quick extra example to show you what's happening. Right, there's that. Here's the cylinder. And I should also mention, as we get into perspective, is one thing you can do, and this is not always the case, but this is one way to help kind of sell things, is as things come closer to us, they tend to get bigger. What does that mean? That means, like, if this is our vanishing point, draw some lines, right? I make a square. And then I use the vanishing lines. Right? You can see how this line is longer than this line. Right? Even though if this cube was to exist in perfect 3D space, we know these are the exact same length lines because you don't make crooked cardboard boxes, right? But because of perspective, this line is shorter than this line. So how is that relevant when we're talking about forearms? Well, fish dish over here, if we talk about forearms and limbs, right? If I want to have, say, a hand here, right? No, it's pointing or something. My forearm can kind of do this sort of shape. Has that same sort of slope to it where this part is longer or wider than this part, right? And if I do this difference, where it makes this kind of shape, that will tell somebody that this part of the arm, or this part is closer to me than this part. And that's one way to communicate perspective to people, is with different widths of the cylinder. Now, as I said before, that's not always consistent, because if you actually look at a forearm, this is where it gets kind of weird. Actual forearm shape, if this is the base, it tapers like this, right? And then this is our hand. And so the problem with a forearm, makes things so stupid, is the wrist is thinner than the elbow. And so if we're looking at it in flat on 2D space, okay, that's fine. But as it fattens, this is really how you communicate to perspective of forearms, is if we go to our little dude here, what really should be happening is they become the same length, right? Yeah, this girl's actually on our way now. Here, right? So this becomes the same length on both sides. Because if this is a forearm existing in perfect 2D space, this one is longer than this one. And so now that we're in 3D space and it's pointing at us, these are the same length. And that's usually what you'll find when you do references with forearms doing weird perspective stuff, is the wrist and the elbow actually tend to become very similar lengths as opposed to when they're just naturally in space. And that's what I wanted to show here. As you can see, let's clear all this out. You can see our dear girl here, right? Duplicate this. These are pretty similar lengths. But you can still see how the forearm tapers a bit. It's not actually the same length. This part is still a little longer, even though her forearm is pointed directly at us, right? It's like it's running along the length of her legs as she's facing the camera. But that forearm still has that problem where it kind of tapers, like, rather than just being straight. And this photo is here to keep that in mind when you're working with forearms and arms. The bicep's pretty fine, because like a bicep is pretty much the same length at the top and the bottom, shoulder to the elbow, but the forearm has that taper to it. That makes things so complicated, right? So that's like a bicep, forearm. See, that's stupid taper. Stupid. I go to bed every night. Literally the worst thing. That's not that bad. I like my forearm. It does great things. Like picking things up, putting them down, and my forearm is a big part of that. So, everybody tracking so far? Is making sense before we move on to stacking other things in random ways? All good? All good? We're all masters of arms in space now, forever. Makes sense. Yep. Cool. I'll typing with perfect practice. Of course, practice is always going to help you get better, because you're not going to improve if you just stare at these things and go, okay, I get it. You got to sit down and you got to draw it, because part of this is you have to learn how to make your hand do what you want it to do. Because a big part of drawing, and this is going to surprise a lot of people, is that connection between your brain and your hand. I know, it's revolutionary stuff. I'll get in touch with Oxford and we're going to research on it. Right? But jokes aside, yes, practice is good. All right, well, these people are following, so let's move on to this interesting photo. And this is a talk about the midsection stack. So I know I said I was going to use consistent colors, but I lied. And that's how we're going to go forward with this. So what I want to do here is talk about the head, the torso, and the hips, and how they work when you put them on top of each other, because this woman is not standing straight up. Incredibly rude, but we're really good artists, so we're going to just work around it, right? So her head's really straightforward because she's looking at us. That's easy. There's her head. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. We want it really good. I'm going to just hyper focus on getting this head shape just right for the next 20 minutes, right? Everyone just take a deep breath. This will be over soon. I'm not apologizing. Anyway, so you can see here that her torso is oriented like this. This is the shoulder, and this is the shoulder. And so, like I said, remember this is shoulder, or sorry, the getting tongue-tied. The hip and the rib cage, the torso, have this kind of shape to them, sort of rectangular shape. And coming back to her, there's like the top of the shoulder girdle, and then it down. Actually, more like base. One can doing this kind of thing, right? You can even rotate it some more. Kind of like this on. Like if this was to be an actual perspective, you could think of it like that, right? There's her rib cage existing in space. And then moving on to her hips, which are also in 3D space, they are doing this kind. Green was a terrible choice. Even lighter. Can you still see her body? I hope so. But her hips are doing kind of like this underneath. Right? And that is what her body's doing. And then like we have the joint and then this cylinder joint, and looks like, what's her leg doing? Okay. Doing this. I said it's doing this. Right? So let's turn her off and take a look at what we've just made here. And you can see how these 3 sections here, right? 2 and 3 are 1, 2, and 3. But each one is doing weird space stuff. Right? Each one's got its own perspective because it's orienting differently based on where she's going. If we were to just get rid of this, let's think about what her spine is. Right? So like her neck comes down here, where her spine would be, and it comes along the back next there. That's what's actually happening with this woman and her strange pose. And so if we think about, like, say, a queen, like her midriff, right? Where I said it had that kind of like little oval, like almost like a tuna can, no, like a squished tuna can kind of shape. Because see the torsos are weird because there's like the stack of objects where it's like you can kind of move in strange ways and crunch. Right? If this is just a simple I'm standing up kind of shape, right? But let's say I want to bend over. What happens is they kind of do this and they sort of squish against each other. Like if they were like Jello cubes, they kind of squish and mold. And what this lady's doing here is she has her chest out, her hips back, and then this is kind of squished in between in this kind of shape of cheese kind of thing, right? And this is, of course, simplified. You can think of the midriff as really 3 sections because there's a 6-pack and those are all different abs that can crunch and move. But I don't want to get too into all the complexities of the torso. I just want to get you familiar with the general shapes of the body. So for this case, I would probably just draw like a little bit scan in between and call it a day and not think about it too hard because we're trying to understand how things are stacking. You can also just do like a few balls, draw a ball in between, right? Because the skin is going to move like that, right? It's just the skin bunches and folds over what all the bones, underlying structures are doing. So you don't have to be too precious or perfect about where things are. Like her rib cage would come down like that, right? We would see her torso kind of stack up because the meat is crunching in the back and then stretching in the front. But because of we're looking, sorry, I'm having like 5 thoughts at once here and getting lost. The eye here, right? As we're looking at it this way, even though her abs are stretched and it's pinching in the back, it's going to look almost like this part is pinching, but it's only because various forms are stacking on top of each other, right? Where it's like having, I'm getting low on space to draw here. What's happening is you're seeing these objects stack where like this is the top one. Colors. And so it's red, green. So like there's an object in the front. This harder to see, and then there's an object back here. And this is essentially how this is working, right? But then these objects move and orient. Sounds happen when someone joins. Yeah, I know. It just kind of throws off my train of thought because I hear the bloop bloop and it's like, what? Because I'm trying to talk about how these objects are together. It's a pretty complex topic. I'm trying to make sure it's as simple as possible. Because these days it's all pretty straightforward and intuitive to me, but doing this so long that that's unfair. But so before I get more into trying to break down the midriff and all the complexities of the midriff, is this making sense so far? Did I get lost anywhere? Also, great chance to have some water. Water, great stuff. Add more coffee though. Sigh. Right. For the most part, cool. Okay, so it's. I'm hoping things are starting to click a bit because I know this can really. This part, I get so many questions about dynamics and perspective. It's one of the most asked about topics people interact with me about, and I want to make sure I don't go too fast and things making sense. But it looks like we're all pretty good. If you have any questions that pop up, we'll do Q&A after as usual. And you can ask me there. Finally, for the last touch, pardon, is talking about drawing people in what you would call guide cubes. Ooh, pardon. Which is something that's really popular for artists that do like a lot of these complex kind of perspectives. Is you imagine her in a box. So let's start with red. If we look at our dude here, our cool little stick man. Right, put him in a box. He's actually in a cube right now, like if I were to say. It's shit. Get her out of the way for now while I. Right. This is perspective. Right. We're just gonna put the general guideline in. Right. So we can imagine like a locker, even big rectangle. We draw our dude. Right? Block this in real quick. Precious people. right? So this is how you can think about human beings inside boxes, where you can see, hopefully, down box, marks. Because this is orienting in this kind of space, if I were to draw a circle here, right? We'll start with a regular circle. Assume there's a circle over here, right? Here's the point. There's our point. If this circle over here were to exist in this perspective, you would see that point that was originally like, say, here, it would move up slightly, right? That. And so when we come over to our body, say this mark right here, going to orient up slightly, right? It comes up as that line moves in space, right? It curves up, because that's how we show form. The change in curves. And it's the same with his chest. His chest moves up slightly. And then we're in 3/4. And now, the extremeness of how high this moves relative to the midline will change as we get lower in the cube because of general perspective, right? This is flat, angled, and so if there was a ball at the bottom, it would still look pretty normal, right? But so you can see, right? If there was a ball down here, it would look pretty normal. But a ball up here is going to do this, right? And so it's the same with the actual parts of his body, right? This orients up and it has this curve like this to it. He's looking up this way, right? He's looking up in this direction. But his feet are going in this direction, right? And so, like torso, it's going to be like if this is our midline, right? This is going to, instead of being here in the middle, it's going to move up ever so slightly. But then his hips, because they're a little lower, they're not going to do this. They're going to probably just go a little bit, right? Then his feet are just pointing straight forward. And that's how we draw human beings within cubes. Everyone making sense of this so far? Yes. Ignis, 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 I see you typing. It's nail biting. Yes, yes. So that's actually something I should mention is the landmarks will shift based on the perspective, which is what I was going to get into with the really weird ones. But I can mention, sure. Nice blue. Like for instance, this landmark relative to this would shift up a bit. So it would, like here, use the green. Okay, so like this one is straight across, right? On our buddy over here, it's going to do a slight curve because we're in space and things are squishing and pulling based on perspective. Same thing with this, with like the knees, it's straight across here, but here there's going to be a slight curve to, actually this one wouldn't be too bad because we're lower, but like his girdle will have a slight curve to it, right? And so where the clavicle may sit, you know, here, it might sit, this is, that doesn't make sense. Like the clavicle might sit higher, or like the nose will sit higher. The parts that are closer to the top of the head will go up more, whereas the ones at the bottom will stay relatively the same. And this will happen like in any perspective. Like if we really wanted to push this, or if, for instance, just put a new one here. Oh, I lost my colors. There we go. If I start a new one. And let's pull up the really weird one. The one I want to talk about. Right? If we do this cube on this absolutely over the top pose here, you're going to get something like this touches the top of her head and goes with the shoulders. You're going to see something like this, and then it's going to come down really hard. Right? She's wearing socks, so you can't really see. Or you can't really see the bottom of her feet. Actually, let's use a different color for the. Oh, make it nice. Clear. Let's try the green. Right? So this is our box around her in this bizarre pose. Right? Probably even more. Really, really pushing it. That's why I picked it. Over the top, which is why I want to talk about. So the head thing is a general, pardon, for men versus women. Actually, that's a great way to think about it. That is an excellent way to think about it. Thanks for pointing that out. Why I like you guys making comments so I can, like, if you're not getting something, I can talk about it differently. So let's just take a break. Or actually, we'll use this woman here. So if we put her a little lighter and go in here, right? Here's the first head. That's one. And then like her rib cage here, that's two. And then we have like her torso or right, here's rib cage. There's the midriff, hips, and you can see how these are all stacking. And then down here, the heads would really start to stack, right? So then there's 5, 7, and we just have like a stack of eggs, right? If you can imagine like eggs, on top of each other. It's about right. I'm not going to get too stacked here. If we look at these on top of each other, you're going to see, right? You stack balls and you look at them and they're on top of each other. You're going to see 4, 2, and it tapers down, right? And you only see partial amounts of each section. And that's what's happening with our friendly little poser over here, right? Like if I were to draw her exact leg, right? And we look at that. That looks pretty silly, especially if I put her head next to it. Her head. Those don't make sense next to each other, right? But because of what's happening with this tapering, that's how we get that effect. And remember when I was talking before about how like one way to show perspective is things get tighter? When we see that in our brains, we think that there's perspective happening. Because if you just look at this woman's pose, what it absolutely is exactly, like none of these proportions actually make sense. You can't really use any of your landmarks here because everything is so twisted. I can't go, well, her knees should be about 1/4 up from the base of her foot, but if we look at it for what it is, right here, like if we look at the whole image as it is, and we do like, okay, here's halfway, and then here's 1/4, that is definitely not her knees. Okay, well, let's try the midpoint. Oh, that's not her belly button. Right, how about this one? That's her eye line. Okay, well, dude, that's not her rib cage at all. What's happening is, remember I was mentioning like doing lines in the box? So if we like grab this and go like halfway, yeah, there's the groin, halfway is about the rib cage, halfway is about the knees. Go to our big old box, and go like say halfway here to here, about there, which is not too far off, right? We go here to here about halfway. Oh, that's actually about the top of her girdle. And then we go here. Oh, that's about the knees, right? Actually, I didn't make this box nearly aggressive enough. As this is actually when you're in these like really when you want to get into like really advanced stuff, what you can do is plot out your lines, right? Just like let's pretend this person isn't here, but like I plot out a line. I want my knees to be there. I want to plot a line. That's the groin, and then I want to plot a line, and that's going to be the pardon, middle of the chest, right? And then we go here, and if we make our box along the, see, it's got to be like super, 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 super sharp. She is so over the top. I did not properly accommodate for. See how this is like super small box, right? It actually isn't effective. I may have picked a pose that was a little. I'm trying to break this down for you guys, and I realize as I'm doing it, like this is actually pretty messed up, right? It's like a really over the top box. Effective is just crazy on this one. Hopefully I didn't do something too wacky and it's making sense. Please tell me this is making sense. So I think I have another pose here that's a little less. Yeah, this one was too. It's the same woman and it shows two things really clearly that might help. Is you can see that taper I was talking about, right? Look how her legs taper. Even though the actual legs, our pose is in the way. Even though, right, here's like a thigh and a shin and a thigh and a shin, right? Look at how those things stack up. And then here's like a hip, here's a midriff, rib cage. It's all just a bunch of eggs stacked on top of eggs on eggs on eggs on eggs. And here's like a giant hand, which is definitely not the length of her face. Three-dimensional perspectives use it box apply point. Yeah, plot your points accordingly. So make your box and break up your box. Obviously. So where was our fella here, right? I have a lot of marks here, don't I? Let's say this guy wasn't drawn yet. This guy was still in his box, right? I can make my lines, right? Here's like the middle one. That's about right. And then here, here, we know that this one's about the girdle, this one's about the groin, and this one's about the knee. If I go over here and I measure between here and here, let's see. Purple's probably better. Between here and here, and I'm actually going to turn this off, so it's not here to distract us. So I want to go about midway boot there, right? So then there's that line, and go about halfway between the top and here's about there, and then we go about halfway between here and here is about there, and you can see that the landmarks are pretty close. Now this cube is a very simple cube, but like if say for instance stream, you would just change this accordingly. Like if I wanted to make like a really messed up box. Get out of here. Get out of here, friend. If I want to make like a really... Actually, we'll go back to our example. Back to our example woman. Right? And as the boxes go... Right? I wanted to draw this pose. Start with your big old box. Actually, you remember doing this. I picked one with like 17 points of perspective. I really wanted to scare people. because it's doing this and it's doing this. So it's actually in more than 1 point perspective. But as far as plotting your lines, right, between here and here, this is why the 2 point, why I wasn't sure if I should get a 2 point perspective. I'm kind of realizing it might have been a little advanced, but because there's 2 perspectives happening, it might not be halfway. It might be actually like down here. This is the kind of thing we can really play with things. Like if I decide I want to do a super hard perspective, and I decide my midpoint is going to be here, right? Once you start with your midpoint, you can really put these anywhere you want, and they decide where your landmark is, right? If you make really extreme ones, so like you can see here, her midpoint's actually like nowhere near the middle of this overall box, and her knees are nowhere near. Actually, yeah, they actually tuck in a bit, and then her shins come out, and then like her rib cage is here. These lines are not following traditional landmarks as we laid out with our stickman. They're doing weird stuff. But you can lay them in wherever, and then you just put the body parts relative to the landmarks. That makes sense. So like, because I know this is a groin one, I'm going to put her hip in around here, right? This is where her hip would go. I know this one's here. I just put that line in there. Okay, that's where her general chest is going to go. So chest, right? And then I know that the head's about, like half here. So then we put her head in. You can kind of see how it starts to take a general shape as these things stack on top of each other. You can even use colors we had before, where like red was the head, right? There's the head. Like here is the torso, twisting in the face, right? And then the hips again down here. Remember, this is all just in perspective. We can do lines and everything. Like if I wanted to, all because it's pretty crazy perspective. There's a line, there's a line, there's a line, there's a line. All of these shapes within these perspectives, all of these internal shapes can follow these overall perspective lines. You can see how this gets really, really over the top really quickly. I know at the end here I kind of got into the really advanced stuff. Maybe it's best to think of it as just a hint of what comes with a lot of practice. And let's just disregard all of this and focus on this part for now. Right? All of this stuff. If you figure out this, you're well on your way to figuring out this. Right? Open my perspective line again. Right. I'll take, what are we at? We're a little over an hour, that's fine. I think I want to make sure this is clear. Okay, so let's say I'm going to make perspectives, right? We're going to do some lines. More obvious, I think, right? We can turn. We're just making a perspective. That's smaller. Big line. Not some big, obvious. Right? Here's a messed up perspective. So, on our cube, I need more lines. I don't know, see, this stuff gets really crazy when you get perspective. You really want to work with your vanishing points because they are going to save you. If you don't have enough lines, draw some more lines. And so like here, draw on our, make this super duper perspective. You just follow the line. Follow the line. Right? If you're really like, I don't know what's going on, draw perspective lines. See, it's just so much easier. So you're like, well, where do I put this back part? Draw some more lines. Right? I don't know where it is. I'm here, do this, and I can just make a mark right here. Boom, mark right here. Boom. Now I know where that is. Go back. Right? You can see here's a really messed up cube. But there it is in the 3D space. So get rid of our lines. Actually, we want to keep our lines because I want to show you this. Photoshop doing? Fighting me. Hello. Okay. Right? So if I was to draw like a torso in this box, you can use all of these lines here to make that torso and get the general guide, right? So let's just pick really simple landmarks, right? So about halfway here and here is here. And then there's another one, there's his knees, and then here's like, say, torso, right? And we want to put in his chest. So we know the chest is around here, right? If this is like our center point, we go up a bit, and we can then, the general idea of where the rib cage should be using this, right? And if we actually try and draw the rib cage, we know it's going to do something like that, right? And here's like the top of the rib cage. The neck would connect right around there. And then this would bend down because of form, right? Right? Because if you think of it like a ball even, our midpoint come down where your sternum would be, and here's where your neck would connect because it's rotating down in space. And I know this is getting so stupid and complex, and I hope I'm not losing people here, but this is the only real way to describe these things. This is why practice is so bloody important. But then it's the same thing with the hip, right? No, this is like the base of the groin here. And so we make our shape, thumbs up. Once again, it's just in perspective, and it's kind of in between, right? Underneath the other one. That is how we're placing the hip. And the knees here, right? Color again. They are these cylinders come down like this, and once more, and once more, and then we have our feet. Right? Does this start to make sense if I do it this way? If I go a little slower. How it's all blocking together, right? And then like here's our shoulder joint, right? And then like our bicep would come down, and then our forearm would come down. You see how it's all tapering. There's our hand. And if at any point, what I'm trying to say here, if you're like, I don't know how this is supposed to go, just draw some perspective lines. Maybe I should do a lesson on actual perspective at some point. So the problem I'm struggling with here right now is I realized that I need to explain perspective to you, or I explain the body's forms to you, because you can't understand, or you won't understand how a cube or rectangle fits inside another rectangle without understanding how perspective works. And that's where we start bumping into problems here, right? So if you're getting into trouble, like, I don't know what to do, just study perspective. Like if you have a leg, like, you even think, well, this is where it gets really weird, is back to the part of things rotating in 3D space. If we go back all the way to the start, we just look at this guy again, right? What's happening what's really, really happening is there's a perspective line behind his leg, right? Behind this leg. But as this cylinder rotates in space, that perspective is now behind. Does that make sense? And so we see the cylinder facing us that's getting wider towards us, thinner in the back. Even though we can't see the perspective line, it's there. It's in behind this dude just radiating out towards us. Right? We're like imagine a little cube here, and then it radiates out. Big one getting closer and closer and closer until it's in your face. And so if I was to wrap all of this up, not sure if this is kind of a cheat, but in theory, can you draw a 3D shape of a leg and then skew the shape to fit in the perspective guide? Yes. Yes, you can do that. You can definitely do that. Maybe actually we should move into the Q&A section, as I feel like there's going to be a few questions right now. I've covered most of the stuff I've covered most of the things that I wanted to cover in basic lecture. Why don't we all move into the Q&A room? And it's okay. That is okay if you jumped ahead, because that is pretty much the gist of it. I'll just come back and wrap up what I was saying about this. When you get into more complex shapes, like when you're doing these women, right, like this woman here, understand that there is more than one point of perspective, as we saw here, right? This is only 1 point perspective. When you start getting to 2 point perspective, if you're getting lost, draw out your shapes along the perspective line, right? Draw out the cubes, draw out the rectangles, draw out the cylinders, and then just follow the flow of the forms. And if you're getting confused by 2 point perspective, stop, put it down, and go back to 1 point perspective. Because if you can't nail 1 point perspective every time, you will not nail 2 point perspective. Guarantee it. And then it goes even higher. You go up to, like, infinite number of perspectives if you want. There's some really advanced artists where their whole thing is just drawing a bunch of people in 5 point perspective, where you have, it's like it's like a fisheye lens, honestly, right? And then it gets really stupid, and they put like objects like motorcycles, jeeps, beer bottles, and all kinds of weird stuff in there to show off about how good they are at art. But anyway, to wrap things up, don't go too fast. Like Kim, it's exactly who I was referring to. Kim Jong-gi is the kind of guy who's like, geez, man, he does it all freehand too. It's really just showing off. So with that, I'll stop the lecture and let's move over into the Q&A room where we can break this down. Peace.